Good morning, everyone. I think I'll use the podium. It's not very often a person of my height finds a podium that fits so perfectly, so I'll use it.
I hear you.
It's good to be part of this panel to hear stories of integration from across the country. My presentation will look at integration from the perspective of a specific type of support, namely the place of faith communities in supporting newcomer cultural and social integration. I come from a nonprofit organization. It's called the Centre for Community-Based Research in Waterloo, Ontario. We do collaborative and action-oriented research in many different social topics. Some of them are dealing with immigration areas. You can see some of them on the screen. Most of these projects were done in partnerships with different levels of government or others in the settlement sectors, working together to create new and innovative services. But recently we began asking the questions, what about faith communities? What role do they play in the settlement equation? Should they play a role? Or what should it look like? How can they better be equipped to play that role? And most recently, we completed a 2-year project academically funded through SSHRC. It focused on Christian churches, which we're planning to expand to interfaith from different religious backgrounds in the future. The title simply was The Role of Churches in Immigrant Settlement and Integration. It was interdenominational, with partners being academics and church leaders from across the country. And it also included key informant interviews, a denominational survey, and case studies of promising practices in 5 different communities across the country. One of the products coming out of that project was this interdenominational guide to action for faith groups wishing to grow their immigrant and refugee work. So why bother thinking about faith communities as we talk about newcomer integration? Well, one reason is historical. In fact, 100 years ago, it was people of faith who led in many areas of social services, including in newcomer support. Immigrants of faith often turned to their own ethnic or religious traditions with their faith communities acting not only as a spiritual center, but also as a community center, connecting people to each other, making social networks and a sense of belonging. But beyond supporting only their co-religionists, faith communities were at the heart of supporting other newcomers as well. Settlement houses and neighborhood houses, which we've heard about today, originally were often faith-motivated. And of course, faith groups from different religious traditions have played a major role in refugee sponsorship over the year. And there was a day not long ago that the federal government didn't implement new refugee policy without first consulting the Canadian Council of Churches. But in the last 40 years, a new player has emerged. We've created a new profession, the settlement profession. It's intentionally secular, it's funded by government, and we invest a lot of resources into it. So what about today? Is the involvement of faith communities something that we've grown out of? Is this yesterday's story? As the Syrian refugee crisis has shown, faith communities haven't lost a role in settlement and integration, but it has evolved. And here's a quick snapshot of what it looks like today. Faith communities are doing a lot. There's some evidence to suggest that their involvement may actually be growing, even if for some their resources are dwindling. They support newcomer integration in a variety of ways, beyond simply refugee sponsorship, and that addresses multiple dimensions. We asked denominational leaders, how are their congregations involved in supporting immigrants and refugees? Number 1 was immediate settlement relief, things like clothing, housing, food. Second was personal development programs, like language classes. Third, which surprised us, was providing support and space to newcomer congregations made mostly of recent immigrants. And fourth was the sponsorship of refugees, and there was a number of other areas as well. There's clear motivation to what they do. It is in part a matter of faith. of being true to their sense of calling as people of faith, but it's also a matter of good citizenship, of doing the right things for others with whom they share this country. And these motivations were reinforced by a no strings attached theme, where many talked about providing support to newcomers without expectations that they attend or be a part of their faith or community. But their supports tend to be reactive. It's not that common for faith communities to go through formal needs assessment, to do proactive service planning, or much less do evaluation of what they do. And then there's those congregations that are made up mostly of newcomers, which seem to be growing and growing in diversity and seen as important builders of social capital, of bonding and bridging newcomers within and outside of their faith community. So with that as a backdrop, moving forward, what have we learned about the place of faith communities in supporting cultural and social integration of newcomers? And I'll sum it up in those two words: relationships and partnerships. Those were the two main themes. So I'll talk briefly about each. But first, do you remember this? Does it look familiar? I see some of you shuddering. This is the program logic model from the CIC settlement sector that you may have seen it in the national call for proposals that you were laboring over summer with. And the two themes relate most closely to the program components that I circled in red. So relationships with community connections and partnerships with needs assessment and referrals on the left. And I thought it might be useful to visualize the place of faith communities within this, the official theory of change of the settlement sector. So first is relationships. Faith communities seem to do exceptionally well at providing informal support in complement to formalized services. Support from people who aren't necessarily paid to support you. A good example are the many faith-run conversational circles that complement CIC-funded language classes. The title of the program in my church is Learn English, Make Friends. That's the name of the program. Learning English, yes, this is about language acquisition. Make friends, this is about more. It's about connecting participants with each other and connecting them to other activities and family events that build their sense of community. Faith communities are often nimble, responding to needs as natural part of having a relationship with someone. One small church in Winnipeg that I met excelled at this. They found many African refugees suddenly coming to their door. People needed clothing, so they started a clothing exchange. Dedicated one room, people brought clothes, took away clothes. People needed transportation, so they bought a van and started driving people around. Refugee youth needed something to do, so they started a football team. I'm talking American football here, too. And on it went, responding to needs as a natural part of life. There's mutuality here, a give and take that comes with supports that are relational and friendship-based. After all, one part of integration is the ability to give back, right? As newcomers inviting people to your home, not only going through the service provider door. So as a result, there is potential here with faith communities, a potential to deepen community connections. Again, whether a newcomer attends or becomes a member of a particular place of worship or not, there is the opportunity to build social networks with all that means for social belonging. But the strengths of faith communities are often also their weakness. Their reactive urge often leads them to do more on their own than they need to. Remember that clothing exchange in the Winnipeg church? Well, it didn't take too long for that pile of clothes to grow, and soon there was problems with mold, which caused the church to think there needs to be a better way to help with clothing. And so they looked down the street, and I kid you not, 2 doors down was a secondhand store. And so they struck a partnership that went beyond clothing. And what about that van? Well, the church realized that it wasn't always being used, maybe on the weekends or the evenings, but otherwise not so much. And they realized that one of their church members worked for a settlement organization nearby, an organization that was lacking in transportation options. So they gave the van keys to that settlement worker who was a church member, and he used that van during the day with his work, and in the evening parked it in his driveway, which was near the church, so the church would have access to it as well. And I'm sure in all of this, they followed the CIC financial guidelines. So these are just two small examples, but I think you get the point that faith groups don't need to do everything themselves, and yet they often have limited awareness of government-funded settlement services, and they need to look around. In other words, what's needed is better resource and needs assessment, better referral systems, and other collaborations that build on the respective strengths of faith groups and settlement organizations. And a good example is right here in Toronto. One of our case examples was of a megachurch here that in their building included a welcome center, a large space that encouraged informal gatherings and mingling, as well as space for settlement organizations to have some of their workers come and provide a range of settlement supports. Settlement workers within a place of worship. So that brings us back to my opening question. Is there a place for faith communities in supporting newcomer social and cultural integration? I think so. Newcomers tend to be more religious than Canadian-born, and many immigrants of faith often first turn to faith communities as a trusted place for meaning and belonging and support upon arrival. And this positions faith communities as a good point of access for relationships that helps to make newcomers feel they belong, and partnerships that provide awareness of and linkages to other settlement services. And in fact, it's these faith and settlement partnerships that we're hoping to focus on next. And if you have any ideas about that, I'd love to talk to you afterwards. Thank you.